I was driving through the middle of nowhere, somewhere between Colorado and Utah. Just empty stretches of desert highway and the occasional gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. The plan was to make it to a cheap motel before midnight, but I had miscalculated how far apart everything was out here. It was nearing 1 a.m., and I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. The gas gauge was hovering just above empty, and I was starting to get that anxious, tight feeling in my chest. There hadn't been a sign for a town in ages. Just as I was considering pulling over to sleep and deal with it in the morning, I saw a gas station up ahead. The old-fashioned kind, just a single pump, and a small convenience store beside it. It was lit up, but there was no car outside, no sign of anyone inside. I pulled up and killed the engine, the sound of the wind filling the silence immediately. The air smelled dry, dusty, like hot pavement, even though the temperature had dropped. There was an old Coke machine by the entrance, its logo faded and cracked. The door was open, just a little, like someone had gone in and forgot to shut it all the way. I stepped inside, and the little bell over the door gave a weak, half-hearted jingle. It was the kind of store that had shelves stocked with expired snack cakes and off-brand soda, a single rotating rack of outdated road maps in the corner. The cooler hummed loudly, the fluorescent lights flickering just enough to make it feel like the whole place was struggling to stay awake. There was no one at the counter. "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the empty store. Nothing but the echo of my voice. I glanced at the security monitor mounted in the corner. The screen was split into 4 grainy sections, one showing the front of the store, another pointed at the single pump outside, one toward the back where a door led to what I assumed was a storage room, and the last was angled toward the road. That was the one that made me freeze. It showed my car, and behind it, something else. A shape. Tall, almost as tall as the car itself. Thin, stretched somehow, as if the screen was distorting it. No features, just a black silhouette standing right behind my trunk. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked over a display of beef jerky, but the lot was empty. The car was exactly as I had left it. Nothing behind it, no sign of movement. Just the wind kicking up little swirls of dust. I turned back to the screen. The thing was still there. And then it moved. Not smoothly. It didn't turn or step, just shifted, like a bad frame cut in an old film. 1 second it was behind the car. The next it was closer, right up against the trunk. And then another shift, closer still. The edges of its shape seemed wrong, like it was flickering between being there and not. I stumbled back toward the door, my pulse hammering. I didn't want to look again, but I had to. My car was still empty, nothing around it. But when I looked at the monitor, the thing was so close to the camera now that all I could see was a black void where its face should be. The door to the storage room creaked open behind me. I bolted. I don't even remember getting in the car, just the jolt of the engine turning over, and my tires kicking up gravel as I sped out of there, gas be damned. My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely keep the wheel steady. I glanced in the rearview mirror, dreading to see something standing in the road, but there was nothing, just darkness, stretching forever. I found another gas station about 30 miles down, a normal one with a clerk who looked half asleep and a couple of truckers filling up. I got out, legs still wobbly, and filled my tank without looking at anything but the pump. I didn't check the back seat before I got back in. I still don't know what I saw. I thought about checking that highway again, trying to find that gas station just to prove to myself it was real. But I can't shake the feeling that it was waiting for me. And maybe next time, it won't stay behind the car. I was heading west, somewhere along a 2-lane highway that cut through miles of empty land. No towns, no exits, just the occasional rusted road sign so sun-bleached you could barely read it. The sun had set an hour ago, and my headlights barely seemed to touch the darkness ahead. I wasn't even supposed to be out this late. I had planned to stop before nightfall, but there was nowhere to stop. Every little town I passed was nothing more than boarded-up storefronts and darkened gas stations. It felt like I had slipped between the cracks of civilization, like the world had forgotten about this stretch of road. Then I saw the diner. Its neon sign buzzed weakly, a faded red open, flickering just enough to be convincing. There were no other cars in the lot, but the lights were on inside. I hadn't eaten in hours and my eyes were getting heavy. Figured a coffee and something greasy might help. The bell over the door jingled as I stepped in. The place looked like it had been lifted straight out of the 60s. Red vinyl booths, checkerboard floors, a jukebox sitting silent in the corner. It was clean but off, like no one had actually touched anything in a long time. A waitress stood behind the counter. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, with her hair pinned up in a neat little bun. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just you?" she asked. I nodded and slid into a booth near the window. Outside, the road stretched on into nothing. No cars, no movement, just the black shape of the landscape pressing in. She brought me coffee without asking, and handed me a menu that looked laminated decades ago. I was about to order when I noticed something weird. The salt and pepper shakers on the table. They were full. Completely full. So was the little metal napkin holder, packed tight with crisp white napkins. The sugar dispenser was full too. Everything was perfectly stocked. But there were no customers. No signs that there ever had been. I tried to ignore it, focused on my coffee instead. It tasted fine. A little weak, maybe, but drinkable. The waitress stood at the counter, watching me. "You come through here often?" she asked. "No," I said. "First time." She nodded like she already knew that. I glanced at the clock above the counter. The hands weren't moving. They were stuck at 2:17. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. "Hey, do you have a restroom?" I asked, mostly just wanting a reason to get up, to move. She pointed toward the back, down the hall. I walked past the jukebox, past the kitchen doors. The hallway was short, just 2 doors. One marked restrooms and the other with a sign that just said staff. The restroom was normal. A little too clean, like everything else, but nothing weird. I splashed some water on my face, stared at myself in the mirror for a second. Then I heard something. A faint sound, like a radio tuned to a dead channel. Just a whisper of static coming from the other door. The staff door. I don't know why I did it, but I leaned in close, pressed my ear against it. For a second, I swore I heard voices. Low, murmuring voices, too quiet to make out the words. And then the sound cut out. Just gone, like it had never been there. I backed away fast, practically ran out of the hallway. The diner was exactly as I left it, but something had changed. The coffee on my table was gone. So was the menu. So was my jacket, which I had draped over the booth. The waitress was still behind the counter, but she wasn't smiling anymore. "You should get back on the road," she said quietly. My heart was pounding. I didn't argue. I just nodded, left a few crumpled bills on the table, and walked out as fast as I could without running. I didn't look back until I was in my car, doors locked, engine running. The diner was dark. The neon sign was off. The windows were black. I sat there for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I had imagined everything. But when I put the car in drive, something in the rearview mirror made my breath catch. The diner wasn't empty. Silhouettes stood just inside the windows, motionless, watching me. I couldn't see their faces, just the shapes of them, lining the glass like they had been there all along. I slammed my foot on the gas, tires screeching as I sped away. I didn't stop, didn't look back again. But even now, when I close my eyes, I still see them, silent figures behind dark glass, waiting for the next traveler to wander in. I was a few hours into my drive when I realized I hadn't seen another car in a long time. It wasn't that weird at first. Some highways get quiet at night. But after an hour of nothing but empty road, it started to gnaw at me. The last gas station I passed had been closed, lights off, pumps covered with plastic bags. I figured I'd find another one soon, but the miles kept stretching on, and my fuel gauge was dipping lower than I liked. When I finally saw a sign that said, "Gas 12 miles," I felt a knot in my chest loose. The station sat alone at the edge of a forest, its lone streetlight buzzing weakly. The building itself was small, with a flickering open sign and 2 old-looking pumps. There was no other car in sight, but I didn't care. I just needed gas. I pulled up to the pump and stepped out. The air smelled strange, like rain on hot pavement, even though the ground was dry. I grabbed the nozzle and pressed the button. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. The station door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a dirty green jacket, and his face seemed off. Not scary, just weird, like his features didn't quite belong together. "Need some help?" he asked. "Yeah, the pump's not working." He nodded slowly, like he was considering something. "Come inside. Got to turn it on from the back." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to, but I was low on gas, middle of nowhere. I followed him in. The inside smelled stale, like old coffee and dust. The shelves were mostly empty, just a few expired snacks and faded cans. The man walked behind the counter, reaching for something under the register. Then the lights flickered. A mechanical whirring noise hummed from somewhere behind the walls. It wasn't a normal sound, not like an AC kicking on or a fridge running. It was deeper, rhythmic, almost like breathing. The man's expression didn't change, but his hand gripped the edge of the counter tight enough that his knuckles turned white. I took a step back. A door behind the counter, one I hadn't noticed before, creaked open an inch. Just an inch. The humming got louder. The man moved quickly, slamming it shut with both hands. The wall seemed to groan as he did, like something inside shifted with the impact. He turned back to me, breathing hard. "Pump should work now," he said. His voice was steady, but his forehead was damp with sweat. I didn't reply. I backed toward the door, my pulse hammering, and stepped outside without another word. The pump worked this time. I kept my eyes on my car as I filled the tank, not looking at the windows, not looking at the building. When I finished, I screwed the cap back on, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Just as I pulled away, my headlights swept across the station one last time. The man was standing in the window, staring out at me. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, barely visible through the dim glass, was a second figure. Taller, motionless, and as my car rolled onto the highway, I could swear it turned its head to watch me leave.